There's a moment you don't even notice anymore. It's when someone takes too long to text back, and your mind starts rewriting the whole relationship. It's when a plan changes, and your whole body tenses. It's when silence feels like something's wrong, even if nothing is. That reaction, that tightening, that instant need to fix, explain, prepare, that's not you being dramatic. That's you trying to control something because somewhere along the line, control started to feel safer than trust. You didn't ask for it. You just learned to brace, to overthink, to tighten your grip when life stopped giving you answers. But here's the thing, that grip is what's making life heavy. Not the situation, not the outcome, but the way you're trying to carry all of it. Control promises safety, but it delivers exhaustion. You wake up already scanning for things that might go wrong. You move through your day with a silent pressure to manage people's reactions. You don't feel present, you feel responsible for everything. And eventually, even the good moments feel like something you have to hold on to tightly, or they'll slip away too. But what if the weight isn't in what you're carrying? What if it's in how tight you're holding it? What if things don't fall apart when you let go? What if they finally begin to fall into place? Control doesn't start as control. It starts as protection. You didn't wake up one day and decide to monitor everything. You learned it, somewhere, maybe early on. You realized things felt safer when you were the one paying attention. When you read between the lines. When you planned ahead. When you held back, adjusted, calculated, stayed prepared, just in case. So, control became your safety net. Your quiet way of staying one step ahead of disappointment, of conflict, of being misunderstood, of being blindsided again. And the worst part? Most of the world doesn't even notice it. They see someone responsible, someone organized, someone strong, who always shows up, always takes care of things, always keeps it together. But inside, you're tense. Your chest stays tight. Your thoughts don't pause, they loop, and your peace feels like it only shows up when everything else is handled. But everything never feels handled, does it? There's always something, a relationship you're worried about, a plan that feels uncertain, a silence that feels too loud, a part of you that whispers, if you let go now, it'll all fall apart. But what if that voice is lying? What if it's not all on you? What if the pressure you've internalized for years isn't actually yours? Because that's the thing about control. It convinces you that your value lives in how well you manage everything. That if you stop, people will leave, things will collapse, and you'll lose your place. But what if the opposite is true? What if your real place opens up the moment you stop trying so hard to earn it? When you stop over-explaining just to be understood? When you stop over-performing just to feel secure? When you stop planning every conversation in your head like it's a negotiation for safety? That's when life starts to breathe again. Not because it became easier, but because you stop trying to micromanage every possibility. And here's what you learn in that space. Peace doesn't come from control. Peace comes from the decision to stop gripping so tightly. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're not here to hold it all. You don't even notice it at first. The shift is quiet, almost forgettable. It's in how your shoulders soften without you telling them to. It's in how your thoughts stop looping after a conversation. It's in how you no longer rehearse your emotions before sharing them. You speak slower, you listen better, you breathe deeper. And not because everything outside you has changed, but because you're not bracing against it anymore. When you stop controlling everything, you don't lose yourself. You actually find the part of you that was buried underneath the pressure, the part of you that doesn't live in reaction mode, the part that doesn't need to defend, correct, or predict, the part that doesn't see silence as a threat, that doesn't see other people's disappointment as your fault. You stop reading between every line. You stop monitoring the energy in every room. You stop rewriting your boundaries based on who might get uncomfortable. And the most powerful part, you don't need everything to go your way anymore, because you no longer see unpredictability as danger. You've made peace with not knowing. You've learned to sit in the in-between without filling it with effort. You've realized that peace isn't about having control. It's about feeling safe even when you don't. And that changes everything. Because the truth is, control doesn't prevent pain. It just prolongs your fear of it. It keeps you stuck in your head, endlessly preparing, never living. It makes you forget what it feels like to trust, not just life, but yourself. To trust that you can handle things when they come, instead of living in constant rehearsal. To trust that you don't need to fix every emotional ripple the second it appears. To trust that space is not abandonment, silence is not rejection, change is not collapse. When you stop controlling everything, you begin noticing things you never had space to feel before, like how often people love you even when you're not trying, how life sometimes surprises you in the best ways after you let go, and how much lighter you feel when you're no longer dragging expectations behind you like armor. Letting go isn't weakness, it's not quitting, it's not giving up on outcomes, it's choosing yourself over the illusion that control equals peace. There's something no one tells you about letting go of control. It doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels like loss, not because you've lost anything real, but because you're losing the identity you built around staying on. Your brain doesn't know what to do with the silence. You'll catch yourself trying to create a problem just to feel familiar. You'll start overthinking again, not because something's wrong, but because your nervous system is detoxing from the constant pressure to stay alert. Letting go doesn't immediately feel light. Sometimes it feels like nothing, an eerie kind of stillness that almost feels unsafe at first. Because when you've spent years scanning for what could go wrong, calm feels suspicious. That's when the inner conflict shows up. A part of you wants to rest, the other part doesn't trust it yet. A part of you wants to slow down. The other part whispers, "Are you sure it's okay to stop?" And this is where most people give up, because they mistake that discomfort for a sign that something's off, when in reality, it's just the absence of noise you've gotten used to surviving in. But if you can stay with it just a little longer, something else starts to surface. Not anxiety, not panic, but clarity. You start noticing what was never yours to carry in the first place. That conversation you keep replaying, that emotional mess someone handed you to fix, that version of you who never said no out loud, gone. Not with force, but with space, with stillness, with a decision to no longer fuel what depletes you. And in that space, you begin to experience a kind of clarity that doesn't scream, it doesn't rush, it doesn't convince, it simply exists, calm, quiet, solid. And suddenly, you're not living to prove your worth. You're living to protect your peace. You stop inserting yourself into problems you didn't create. You stop fixing people who never asked to be saved. You stop explaining your boundaries like they're up for negotiation. You finally let life unfold, not because you've given up, but because you've given in. To presence, to trust, to the kind of self-respect that doesn't come from being in control, but from being clear about what's no longer yours. You'll notice the change in small ways before you ever notice it in big ones. It happens in a conversation, where you feel that familiar urge to over-explain yourself, but this time you pause, and you don't. It happens when someone misunderstands you, and you don't rush to fix their perception. You let them sit with it. It happens when your plans fall through, and instead of spiraling, you just breathe and adjust. You're not shutting down. You're not avoiding. You're just not reacting from fear anymore. And that's what real freedom feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, not Instagram worthy, just a softer, slower return to yourself. You're no longer performing presence. You're living it. You make decisions without asking the world for permission. You say no, and you don't feel like you need a 5-paragraph apology to justify it. You feel something rise in your chest, and instead of shutting it down, you get curious. Not everything needs to be managed. Not every emotion needs to be redirected. Not every situation needs your intervention. You start to understand that peace is not passive. It's intentional. You have to choose it in every moment where your old patterns try to pull you back in. The pattern that says, don't make them uncomfortable. The pattern that says, handle it now so no one gets upset. The one that whispers, fix it, fix it, fix it. But now you meet that pattern with something new, stillness. Not because you don't care, but because you finally trust that it's not your job to hold the world together. You let people think what they think. You let outcomes unfold without chasing them down. You let life breathe, even when it's awkward, unclear, or slower than you want it to be. And in doing so, you find something no amount of control ever gave you: lightness. Not because your life is suddenly perfect, but because you've stopped weighing it down with the pressure to orchestrate everything. You start to experience yourself in a new way, more grounded, more honest, more aware of what actually matters, and what was just noise dressed as urgency. And that's when you begin to realize you didn't need to control it all. You just needed to stop believing it was your responsibility in the first place. Something else begins to shift, not just inside you, but around you. People start to notice, even if they can't put it into words. The ones who were used to you always saying yes might pause when you say, "Not this time." The ones who relied on your emotional labor might feel confused when you stop showing up to smooth everything over. The ones who only knew the version of you that shrank, softened, or over-delivered, they may pull back. Not because you've changed in a bad way, but because you're no longer carrying what was keeping them comfortable. And that can be disorienting, even lonely at first. It's strange to realize how much of your presence was built around managing others. But what's even stranger, how many people stay? Not for what you do, but for who you actually are beneath all of it. You begin attracting different energy when you stop trying to control everything. Not because you're doing anything flashy, but because calm has its own gravity. You become a kind of mirror, not the type that distorts itself to make others feel safe, but the kind that reflects the truth quietly, without manipulation, without performance. Your boundaries become clearer, not louder. Your conversations become cleaner, not colder. Your emotional presence becomes richer, because it's no longer rooted in obligation or fear. And that's the real shift. You're not trying to be liked anymore. You're not trying to be impressive. You're not trying to be palatable, fixable, or marketable. You're just being real, not raw in a chaotic way. Real in a peaceful way. And real has power, because it's rare. In a world addicted to noise, to doing, to chasing, to proving, being grounded, open, and unbothered becomes your most natural form of rebellion. You no longer filter every word through fear. You no longer stay silent just to avoid tension. You no longer interpret other people's discomfort as your responsibility to fix. You trust that discomfort can coexist with respect, that boundaries don't require guilt, that peace doesn't require perfection, only clarity. And in that space, your life starts to realign, not because you're forcing it, but because you've made room for it. Room for honest relationships, room for deeper rest, room for self-trust, the kind that doesn't need constant validation to stand strong. This is what alignment feels like. Not having control over every part of your life, but finally realizing you don't need to. You don't need to explain yourself in every conversation just to feel valid. You don't need to keep every plate spinning just to prove you're responsible. You don't need to chase peace by managing everyone else's expectations. Because the truth is, life was never meant to be held that tightly. And when you stop controlling everything, something unexpected happens. Life starts meeting you in the middle. The people who belong in your life begin to move toward you without pressure. The decisions that used to drain you become easier to make. The future that once felt heavy starts to feel spacious. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become passive or cold. It just means you stop shrinking yourself to hold everything in place. You begin to trust, not in a fantasy, but in something more honest, that you can show up fully and still let go, that you can be deeply present without being in charge of the outcome, that you can live without overcorrecting, overthinking, or overgiving. Because peace isn't something you chase. It's something that rises when you stop interrupting what wants to unfold. And yes, it's unfamiliar at first, but eventually it becomes your new normal, your new rhythm, your new weightlessness. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours.